guys. So, tell me, you guys grew up here.
Yes.
Correct, both
Yes.
grew up here. What was life like in Frederick in the mid-50s?
But it was happy days. We didn't know it at the time, but the town was at its peak population-wise, about 7,000 people, and the churches were full. This was before television sort of took over our lives, and it was a place to grow up like I can't imagine again. I really enjoyed it.
It was great because we all were recovering from the war. Our parents were. All the kids were loved, and everybody came from a home with a mom and a dad nearly. And there wasn't much divorce going on in those times, and there wasn't any risk of leaving your house unlocked. I never had a key to our house when I was a kid growing up, but I always came home and either opened the door or walked right in. It wasn't locked. And it was just a peaceful, nice time to grow up. Really nice.
Tell me, music. Did you all listen to music? Was Elvis or anyone? I mean, what did y'all
Yeah,
listen
we can predate Elvis a little bit. It was gospel quartet music until one of our high school music teachers came along and taught us to sing in Latin, and we learned to appreciate good music. But Elvis then, of course, took over, and we all loved Elvis.
Yes, we all had a radio. I had a radio in an old car. Before the car had a radio, I bought an old used radio and put it down on the floorboard and wired it in with speakers and everything so I could have music. But yeah, we listened to a lot of music.
What about movies? There's a movie house here in town. Did you all, in Vernon as well?
Yeah, we had the Ramona. It was built in 1929, the Mediterranean architecture. And when we really wanted to show off, we went to Vernon. We'd take our girlfriends over there. But I remember it was the window on the world to have the Ramona.
I remember as a teenager, I had a job where I made $1 a day, and that doesn't sound like much money. But at the time, I could go swimming for a dime, and I could go to the show for a dime. And so I had more money than I needed to do the things I wanted to do. So I felt like a rich kid, you know. And sometimes we'd go to the show, and if it was a double feature, we'd just stay for the second one too, you know. But we had fun.
Did y'all get in any trouble? I mean, not trouble, as
Mostly with our parents, I think. If we stayed out too late or didn't do what we were supposed to do out in the public, our parents would find out about it before we got home.
Yeah.
And we were caught.
I don't think I ever got in trouble. I don't recall ever getting in trouble really as such, you know, but I'm sure I made my mom and dad upset a time or two.
a lot of players go to church.
Yes.
Been here all the families.
Yeah,
Yes.
I think that was one of the reasons we didn't have any trouble with integration of our football team, because there were a lot of kids that went to church, and they may not have had all their theology in line, but they somehow knew that they were supposed to be nice to everybody.
Yeah, my mother and dad were nice to everybody, and we grew up with the love in our hearts, I think, you know, for each other, and we just developed new friends when we became football team.
Going back a bit, what did your parents do?
My mother and daddy were blue-collar workers. Daddy worked for the Soil Conservation Service, and mother worked in a department store as a sales clerk, and then later as a dental assistant.
My mother and father were both school teachers, and they grew up in big families, but both of them had college educations, and they instilled in us children that they would try to help us any way we possibly could, but they'd love for us to go to school. My sisters had 2 sisters and myself, and we all 3 ended up with college degrees. So.
Now, neither of my parents graduated from high school, but from my earliest days, as Jerry said, we heard, "You're going to college. You're going to college." Thank God every day for my mother and dad.
So when did you all find out that you were integrating the team? Did you find out after the previous school year? Was it right before summer practice? When did you all find out?
You know, I don't remember exactly when we found out about the football team being integrated, but I knew we were headed that way because we did play track with them the spring before our fall season. So we had run track with them. And I don't recall when we
I don't recall, except maybe it was just right before football's 2-a-days started. We didn't have a lot of forewarning, I don't think.
Our coach had a way of getting things done in a peaceful manner, and he brought our teams together without any fights, without any bad language toward each other, no jokes were told. We just knew that that was the right thing to do because he said this is the way it's gonna be, and that's the way it was. We were thankful.
But the community had a problem with it.
We didn't know that, but yes.
I realize now they probably had a great big problem with it, but we were just unconscious to that problem.
I'm sorry to have you repeat yourself, but can you say it in such a way where you say we were oblivious that the community had a problem because in answering the question we want to include the question. In answering the question, we want to include the question with the answer. You know what I'm saying? Thank you.
Yeah, we were oblivious to the racial problem that may have existed among our parents and the community at large. We just were not aware of it ourselves.
Did you know any of the other players, Logan or any of the guys, before you all came together?
Had no names whatsoever, knew none of them.
I think we'd had one scrimmage in basketball against the Boyd High School kids, and they beat us in no uncertain terms. They were so good. And it was probably wise that the City Fathers did not integrate the basketball team. But the football team was greatly enhanced.
How tough were practices?
I remember the two-a-days when we first were together. High school boys have a way of expressing themselves that they've heard their parents do, and there were a lot of racial epithets that came out sometimes when we were all together. But when we were then integrated, we had to watch ourselves, or we would accidentally say something that would be racist that we didn't really mean because it was a part of our speech. And I shall not mention what those are.
It was an easy transition for me. When we started playing football together, the coach sat us down the very first day in a circle, and he got in the middle and he said, guys, he said, we're going to start a football team that's going to have some blacks and it's going to have some whites on this team. He said, we're not going to fight. We're not going to say ugly words toward each other. We're not going to be fighting each other. Our opponent is the opposing team. And he said, I won't stand for anything other than that. And we all understood it, and it was a very easy transition for us because, to my recollection, we never, ever had an argument, a fight, any kind of a racial conflict in that team. And it just drew us together and realized that our opponent was our enemy, not each other.
I think it was a lot harder for the black football players to come over to our field and play with us, not knowing any of us, and having all that they probably had in their heads from their parents and community of the fears of being together. I've heard several of them say that, it was tough that first practice or two, just to get used to it,
Yeah,
but not from us.
I've heard several of them.
Sorry, yes.
I've heard several of them say that it was not, there were no hard feelings on their part either. So they understood that it was going to be a mutual agreement that we get along, so.
I just think they were probably more nervous than we were.
How did your girlfriends feel and your families?
I had no problem with my family or my girlfriend. I don't think I ever heard anybody say anything negative.
Yeah, I'm not trying to whitewash it, but there just wasn't any of that. I don't remember anything at all from my girlfriend or from my family.
I think back about those days and I wonder how it really did happen so easy.
Yeah.
Because it was a transition for us that just flowed along as if there wasn't ever a conflict. And I think back about it and I wonder how in the world that was accomplished. But I think our coach had a great deal to do with that. I think he had a tremendous influence on us.
We adored him, and most of us would have run through a brick wall if he'd asked us to. And so when he said something was going to be a certain way, we didn't buck him, and that's the way it's going to be.
Yeah, let's talk about Coach Wild. How tough a coach was he? Was he hard on you
He was a
boys?
demanding coach. He expected the best that you could do, and then a little bit more maybe. So I think he got more out of us, especially me, than I had ability. I think he helped me become better than I probably would have been had I not had him for a coach. But he was tough. I mean, we didn't have easy scrimmages, easy practices. It was tough.
He formed a relationship with all of us that was personal. I remember seeing him during practice, you know, at this time he was in his 40s when he was here, and he would come out there, and if he could not get across to one of us, black or white, what he wanted, he would demonstrate it. And he was still pretty good, even in his 40s. And at the time, I was 17, and I had already started preaching a little bit. I felt called to the ministry. And every time I got a chance to preach at some little small country church, I'd look out there on Sunday morning, there he'd be sitting with his wife Mildred. And you felt that kind of support. It was a reciprocal love relationship. And it continued right down to the end of their lives, when 3 of the backfield did their funerals.
He was very motivational. He really made us feel like we could do things and that we were important.
Was he tougher on certain kids that needed it? Like, you know, you said, Jerry, you needed to be pushed harder than maybe others, or did he, I mean, was he yelling at kids and then softer on
He
other
was
kids?
awfully hard on Ouija, our quarterback. And I think, as you said, Jerry, he got a lot more out of Ouija than Ouija probably had to give, because he wanted to please the coach. But I always thought the coach was a little hard on him.
Yeah, he would be probably, if you had to say whether he was harder or softer, he probably was harder on us than he had to be, but it probably made a better team out of us, really.
When we get way ahead of somebody, like we got way ahead of Snyder, was up the road 20 miles in the first half, and he took us out, the first string, and let their other team play right down to the third string, I think.
Yes, I did. I got to play the biggest part of the second half, and I was on third string.
I mean, we still beat them 70-0. So he was not the kind of coach who wanted to just rub someone's nose in it. You know, he taught us fair play.
Yeah, I think we could have probably been 150-0 that first game if he'd have wanted to, but he let everybody play. Being a sophomore, I thought, well, I probably won't get to play in many of the games. I played in every game. Now, it might not have been but a minute or two toward the end on some of the games that were close, but on the ones where we were way ahead, I played a quarter or more, and I was on third team, so we all got to play, and he was very fair about that.
How did he rotate? Because it was just him on the sidelines, correct?
Doctor J.D. Norton, Coach Norton, was also there.
Because he was out recruiting at
Right.
future games, though.
Yes,
right?
he was not at a
Yeah.
lot of the games.
Is that
but-
right?
Yes, but he was, he would, he would be at a few of them, yeah.
Mhm.
But I don't remember exactly how many he was at,
Yeah.
but mostly it was Dean Wild that was the coach that was there.
Was the integration? I mean, you guys the camaraderie pretty immediate, or did it take some time?
In my opinion, it was immediate.
Yeah.
From that first practice on, I felt like, hey, we're gonna make this just fine, you know, we're gonna have a good football team. And he told us the very first day, he said, guys, he said, I don't care what color you are. He said, if you're the best player for that position, then you're gonna play that position. We're not gonna have any fussing or fighting over who's playing. It's just a matter of who's best for that position. So everybody understood that if you played hard and worked hard, you get to play. And if you weren't the best, then you'd sit on the sideline and somebody else would be starting, you know. So, but it was understood. We had no problems with that.
Plus, we saw how very excellent these young black athletes were. They were as fast as greased lightning, and we were proud of them. And we told them that, you know, we bragged on them. And the ones who played in the line were tough as boots. They were really good. So there wasn't a feeling of jealousy, I don't think, or competitiveness on the team. We were just glad to be winning. Frederick had not won big time in 10 years, going back to 47.
Did you have some players quit or didn't show up for the season once they found out? Do you remember?
I don't have any recollection of anybody quitting. No, I don't.
A funny thing that happened, I remember Coach telling us about it the next day after the Friday night game on Monday's practice. And we won real big here at home, and everybody was proud of the new team and how good they were. And he said some kid who was probably a James Dean wannabe kind of kid came up to him after the game and said he wanted to know if he could go out for football and play with his winning team. And Coach just laughed his head off over that. And we saw him in the classroom. He taught geometry and maybe history. I don't know what all he taught.
Yeah, geometry and something else. I remember in a geometry class that I had with him, we loved to get him started talking about the next week's team that we were gonna play, because if we could ever once get him started talking about football, then the class was over. We didn't have to worry about any more geometry. From then on, it was just football.
Oh, that's a great story. As far as his teaching, was he a tough teacher?
No,
No.
not in my opinion. But I learned.
Yeah, he
I
was-
did learn from him.
One of the things that I remember, and I may be going back to this a little bit, not only did we get along during practice and during the games, but coming home from on the bus, when we would sing some of the songs led by the black students, players, but then after everybody got tired and they were a long trip home, I remember looking around the bus one night, and everybody was lying on each other's shoulder, their head against the shoulder, leaning over in their lap almost, trying to just get some sleep. And the fact that we were different colors, it was really amazing to me even then that was not a problem. Not a problem at all. We showered together, saw each other naked, and it just never was a problem.
Did it start when, like the first bus trip, was it segregated then and then it became intermingled, or did it just immediately, like you guys?
No,
Just
I
sat
don't
down on the
ever
bus
remember anybody sitting
Yeah,
at the back.
no.
I mean, we all sat anywhere. It was not segregated on our bus at all.
And I'm sure you may have already heard this, but when they would not feed us away in away games, we came home without eating. He would not allow us to be divided for the meals. If they weren't going to feed everybody, they weren't going to feed anybody. And I think a time or two we came back home to eat because we couldn't eat where we were. But we didn't know that. I don't remember knowing that.
We didn't know what the coach was going through to try to find a restaurant that would serve our whole team. Sometimes he'd have to go to several, he said, before he could find one that would feed us. It may not even be in the town where we played football. We might have to drive to another town in order to be fed, but he'd find some place to feed us, all or none. One time he couldn't find a place, and he stopped at a grocery store and bought lunch meat and bread and mayonnaise and all that. We just made sandwiches on the bus and ate. But he wasn't going to have them serve us in one part of the cafe and the others in another part. So we always ate together.
So how did that work? So he'd pull the bus over, he'd go in by himself and ask first, and then you guys would stay on the bus?
Either that or prior to the game, he probably had gone to several of these cafes to find a location. See, these are things that we didn't find out about until years later. We found these out 50 years later, that he went through these things. Once at his award ceremony where he was honored a humanitarian award, and we found out some stuff there. And then at our 50-year football reunion, we found out a lot more then. But a lot of this was hidden from us. He just didn't discuss it with us about having problems. And I'm sure he had problems with a lot of city people too for what he did. But we're grateful that he did it because it made our lives all better. And I think integration for us was a much easier thing to happen, than for some people.
Were you guys arrogant, being so good?
I
Probably.
didn't feel arrogant.
No.
I felt lucky. I felt very lucky to be honored to be on a team like that. But it didn't make me feel arrogant. I was proud.
It wasn't arrogance, but I remember how absolutely shocked I was when we lost. Harding High School beat us the next year after we'd lost some of our better, fastest guys in the backfield. And I just thought nobody could beat us. I thought that's a kind of arrogance, isn't it? But I was really humbled and brought back to reality.
Now, this was a year after we had won state.
Yeah.
The following year, we won all 10 games, and we were in the second game of the playoffs, I believe, when we got beat that next year.
But you guys lost a scrimmage to Lawton, I read, that year in '56.
I don't remember. That's very possible.
Yeah.
But we beat Lawton 21-7, I think, when we played them in the season.
Yeah.
And Lawton was a lot bigger than we were. I'm not even sure it was a conference game.
Well, he said a scrimmage game, but
Yeah.
I don't remember.
Well,
I don't remember.
Yeah, I saw it. I was reading the newspaper we were going through yesterday and saw that one of your first scrimmages that you guys lost, and I just didn't know how that.
Now, we were Class B, and Lawton was either A. I guess they were A.
Yeah, they were A.
And that possibly is true. I don't remember. I don't know. But it wasn't a game that counted, that's for sure.
I remember we played somebody, it may have been Lindsay, and at the half, it was 7-7 or 13-13, and we just were sure we were gonna win, but when we got in the locker room, he said, the score is 13-13, but you're behind. And we looked at him like, what? He said, they have more penetrations than we do. If it ends like this, you lose. And that got our attention.
Was that during the
I think it was 56,
for the season
something.
that we won?
Because we weren't used to being close even, you know, we could get way ahead and coast.
Was he a motivational speaker before you guys went out, left the locker room?
He wasn't loud, but he instilled in us that we were supposed to do our best, and he expected
Yeah.
the best from us. But he wasn't one of these loud, screaming, holler type
No.
before the game. He was louder when we were out on the field, and he wanted us to do something. It didn't matter where we were on the field. He had a voice that was extremely loud and very penetrating, and even the crowd on the opposing side could hear every word he said to us. So he was able to convey his wishes out there on the field.
What about, did you pray before you went out as a
We
team?
did, yes.
Because I was one of the preacher boys on the team, he generally called on me in the locker room just a few yards from here, to say a prayer before we got on the bus to go to the field.
Yes.
We didn't pray on the field. Prayed in
But
the
he
locker room.
allowed that every game that I recall.
And you led that? Dan?
I'm sure I wasn't the only one, because Ouija was also a preacher in the making, but I remember he called on me a lot. So,
And at halftime, was he, here we are in a locker room, everybody gets together, and would he go to a player, Danny, you're just, you fumbled.
Yeah.
Would he do that type of thing, or would he just talk to you as a team?
we got in a circle at the end of the field. Go ahead.
I remember him talking more to the team than
Yeah.
individuals. Now, there may be instances where he did have something to say to an individual, but to me, he more or less gave the speech at halftime to all of us. I don't remember the one-on-one type talking.
Yeah, we would just get in a circle, and he would stand in the middle and talk to us about what we needed to do in the second half. But I don't recall that, and he may have gone privately to those guys as they walked to that place. But again, he was kind of quietly motivational
So this was on the field,
on the field,
You never
in the
went to
end
the
zone,
locker
down
room?
on one end.
so you never went to the locker room at halftime?
No, we didn't have a locker room out the football field.
Yeah, normally
sometimes
especially
go
at
on the
home games, we always had to huddle up at the end of the field because there wasn't a locker room.
We
out
may have
there.
gone on the bus a time or two.
Depending on how cold it was, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. We had one game, the third game of the playoffs, and it was, the night before it had frozen pretty hard, and we walked out on the field the next morning before the game, and we would crunch on the ice. You could feel it on the grass, and we thought, well, maybe this is gonna be a tough game, but it ended up, we won handily that day, but I remember that, worrying
Oh,
about whether
yeah.
or not we were gonna be able to keep our feeding and stuff like that, our footing on the field, so.
Was there racial tension with other teams you played? Did you
Yes.
feel-
Yes.
Just one is
Mhm.
the last playoff game, and they got against one of our tackles.
Okmulgee Dunbar.
They
Yeah.
were hurting or kicking and stomping on one of ours, and so the whole team came out, and we just all got into a brawl,
Yeah.
a fight out on the field.
Didn't happen real often, but it did happen a time or two.
But it wasn't our team against each other; it was somebody against one of our guys.
There was a neighboring town here in the county who really were unhappy about our integrated team. And they blamed our winning on the superior black athletes. So when we went down there, Coach played us together, and we scored a couple of times, and then he put an all-white team in, and we scored, and then he put an all-black team in, and they scored. So he kind of put to rest that idea that it was their superiority that was making the difference when we beat them with 3 different teams, really. Isn't that true? Did he do that?
Yeah.
Would it be every time the offense went out, or was it just per quarter, or how did that work?
I don't recall exactly how it was, but I heard them talk about it, and they said that they thought it was every series. He would change every series. One series, one set of downs, he'd have the whites in there. The next time we got the ball, it would be a set of downs, he'd put the blacks in, and either one of them did good against them, so.
Did you understand at the time what he was doing?
I didn't.
No,
I didn't.
not at
I'm
all.
sure, I mean,
I was playing
Yeah.
football.
I learned that much many years later.
so I mean, Danny, you're a starter, so you're wondering why you're not going
Yeah.
out there.
I figured it's because we were ahead, because he often did that. He'd
Yeah.
take first string out and let everybody play.
Everybody got to play, but we didn't realize, I didn't at the time, that everybody out there was white or everybody out there was black. I never even thought about it, you know. And he was doing it to show the other town that it wasn't the superiority of either one, but either one of his teams could beat them, you know. So
Did, going back to the state championship, that's the one where you guys got in a fight, correct?
yes,
Yeah.
And how did, I mean, so you guys were already playing, it wasn't like a pregame thing,
No, he's
No,
like in
it
the
was
third
third
quarter.
quarter.
Yeah,
third quarter?
yeah.
And you guys were up quite a bit by then, right?
Yeah, we beat them 33-0, didn't we?
Yes.
Something like that. Yeah, they were just so frustrated. You see it in sports all the time. In basketball, they'll hack somebody when they're losing, just to show that they're mad, you know.
Was it just dirty?
Yeah. I remember thinking, I don't want to be in this brawl, and I ran off the field. Because as a Christian, I thought it was wrong to fight, you know. Play fair, hit hard, but don't take cheap shots and don't slug anybody. And it didn't last long.
no, it didn't last. 30 seconds maybe.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate a little bit on how the fight started? Just tell that story.
Probably, Danny Miller probably made a long run, and they hit him real hard, and then Lloyd or somebody, or L.C. Perry
I
probably.
think it was L.C. Perry
Yeah, he
that
was
was a
tough.
tackle
Yeah.
that actually got into a fight of some kind, and I wasn't on the field at the time, so I don't know for sure what started it. But later they said it was somebody hit LC or took their helmet off and whammed him or did something, and I don't know exactly how it started myself. But once it started though,
It escalated.
it escalated even with the fans coming out on the field, so.
Tell me about LC. How was he? What kind of
LC was a quiet, built like a tree trunk young kid who was as strong as an ox, and he was just unmovable. He was, you'd almost be afraid of him. I was glad I was playing on his team, because I wouldn't want to oppose him. And I think maybe that's what triggered the fight, was he was just so blooming good.
What,
You
what,
have-
what,
The
what
eyes.
position did he play? Or positions?
Tackle. He
Yeah,
was a
left tackle or
tackle.
right
Yes,
tackle?
I think left tackle.
Left
played.
tackle, I think.
And he was very, very good at his position. And somehow somebody did something that got him started that final game. That's the only fight I remember of any of our games. I don't think we ever had any other
That's so.
fight.
The coach wouldn't let us fight. I mean, that's not gonna happen. That's why he had that little speech.
Yes,
We're not gonna do that. And if he said we weren't gonna do it, we didn't do it.
we listened to him.
Did y'all feel disrespected within the community? I mean, 'cause I've seen the newspapers and there was never hardly any mention. You guys won a state championship and it wasn't even on the front page. It was a little article on the back page. It was just,
I didn't.
I never felt any hard feelings
No.
from anybody really, toward me anyway, as a player, you know. I'm sure in the back door, there's things were said probably, but not to me.
When you think of how early that was, 56, my parents were good church-going Christian people, but there were racial epithets in my home all the time, referred to them with the N-word. And I grew up hearing that, just like all the kids did, and we all used it until we had this experience. Then I quit using that word. I never used it again because I knew it was unfair, you know, and it was not true. And I think the fact that most of us were church-going kids may have, I can't prove this, but it may have contributed to the racial harmony. I would like to think it did.
I can tell you for sure it improved my life in the respect to other people of other races. I had a totally different attitude toward other people after I graduated than I did before I'd started playing football. So it was a benefit to me.
Yeah.
What do you want people to know about Frederick, the 1956 Frederick team?
Well, I want them to know that in a place that normally would have been extremely prejudiced, and was to a degree that there were separate drinking fountains in the courthouse, the children who lived on the west side of the railroad tracks could not swim in our municipal pool, even though their tax money helped pay for it and operate it. And there were a lot of things like that that were wrong. That there was a time when the football team was integrated through the bravery of a coach who probably got fired later when he finally had a losing season, because there were people who didn't like what he did, but they were mixed about it because they were glad we won the state championship and we had a strong team. But from that day on, things began to slowly change. When I would be asked to come back and preach in my First Baptist Church pulpit here, there was one or two of my teammates who were black who came to hear me, but they sat in the balcony. And it was much, much later where Charles Shaw came one time and sat down on the second row.
I would hope to think that our team had an influence in the city of Frederick in starting the slow, gradual process of integration. I think that it did help all of us kids because we saw it right away. And I think probably if in my opinion, I'd like to think that our team kind of helped the whole city start the process of peaceful integration, really, knowing that it was wrong, the way we had been brought up and the way that the world had been prior to then. I think it was a good transition step for us.
One little side story, I don't know if you've heard this or not yet. Prof. Kennedy was the bishop of the school system for Boyd High School. He'd been here a long time and everybody loved and respected him. And he's one of the unsung heroes of this story, because when they won the state championship in like 54 or 55, and Dean got the idea of putting them on our team because the new racial law in the country was if you don't have that sport, you're welcome to do it at another school. And Prof. Kennedy just decided suddenly at that same time not to have football. So I think the fact that football was out over there made it easier for Dean to have them come over here. And I doubt if he gets a lot of credit for that. I don't even know his full name. Prof. Kennedy was how we knew it.
Yeah.
So you think that was an intentional decision?
It sure sounded like it, and all I can tell you is I read that story. No one told me that story. Perhaps some of the other players can verify it or disband it.
I had been told that there was not enough finances to furnish two teams, and
that may have been true.
And that may have been why they had to quit, and then it allowed them to be eligible to come play with us. And our coach, Dean Wild, knew that the law stated that if they couldn't play, then they were invited to play with the white team. So I think that's probably what got it started.
After the season, or after, Friday night, did y'all socialize?
No.
No, we didn't.
And then that was wrong. And through the years, we've all carried a little bit of guilt because even though we get together at special times, we don't see each other enough between times. When we finally found out where everybody lived, 40, 50 years later, then we've made an effort to do this. I know Danny Miller was selling appliances, and my wife and I went over and bought a washer and a dryer from them, but we haven't taken them out to eat. And that's where it really, I think, is still wrong. We
Yeah,
still
we
need,
could stand
still
some
need to do
improvement
something
on
about that.
but we are close friends.
Yeah.
We're close friends.
There was no reaching out from either side. Yeah. But we've been friends through the years.
But you see the admiration.
Yeah.
Yes.
Lloyd Logan is one of the finest preachers I've ever heard. He is really good. And he's a leader here in his hometown to this day.
Yes, he was on the team. He wasn't but about 5'6", I
Yeah.
think. But he was one defensive linebacker. And it didn't matter if they ran around the right end or the left end or right across the center. Lloyd was in on 50% of all the tackles.
He was fast.
He was one of the reasons that only 3 teams scored a point on us. The rest of them were 0. And Lloyd Logan was a big part of that, in my opinion. I got to sit on the sideline a lot and watch him, and I'd watch. I knew because I admired the linebacker position, and I'd watch him, and it didn't matter where they went. He seemed like he was always there. So he was a good inspiration for me to be a better linebacker.
Finally, one last thing. If you could use one word to describe the 5016, or 2 words, how would you describe it?
Fortunate, lucky. It happened. It was one of those ripening moments. We just were fortunate enough to be here when it happened.
I'd say a blessing for me.
The honors I got, I don't think I would have gotten them if it hadn't been for those boys coming over to play with us. They made us that much better. If it had been an all-white team, I'm not sure it would have happened.
And the awards, yeah, I forgot to ask you about that. Well, what awards did you win?
Well, I was chosen back of the year in '57, and when I graduated from high school, I was chosen High School All-American, which meant I got to go play in a football game. But I don't think that would have happened. I mean, I thought I was pretty good because I read the headlines in the paper. But I look back on it now, and I know I got those holes were created by guys on the line who were blocking for me, and they were fantastic, white and black. Bill Brown and Lewis Edwards and Jerry Edwards were white guys playing with Robert Pope and Pete Cluis and L.C. Perry. They opened a lot of holes that might not have been there otherwise.
Where'd you play after high school?
I went to Baylor on a full football scholarship, but I was so immature I only stayed 1 year. So I gave football up for the ministry, they said. Yeah. But the truth is I was in love with a girl up here. And I couldn't break off and be a mature boy down there in Texas, too far away. So I ended up coming back to OU.
But not playing football?
No, I could have. They had tried to recruit me, but again, by this time I was engaged to be married. So again, I'm like Samson, I guess. Women, have been my downfall in terms of athletics.
Jerry, what about you?
Well,
after high
Dean,
school?
when I graduated in '59, Dean said, Jerry said, I can get you a football scholarship if you'd like one. And I weighed 160 pounds as a senior. And I had been beat up and hammered and everything. And I had a broken nose the last game of my senior year. And I said, Dean, I appreciate very much the fact that you could get me a scholarship to play football. But I said, I believe I'll go a different route. I ended up being a dentist. So I just didn't have the size. I loved the football and I loved the sport, but I felt like it wasn't going to be something that I'd be real good at in college. So I went a different route.
Mildred, Dean's wife, was in charge of the selective service here in Tillman County. I can't prove this, but I always felt like that was one reason I never got drafted. I don't think it had anything to do with it, but we loved this couple, and all through the years we've stayed in touch with them, and letters, phone calls, seeing each other whenever we could. It was a relationship that began then that lasted until the end of their lives.
Thank you all so much.
Yeah.
Okay,
This is-
thank you.